Hello there, friends. It's Jimmy Maverick. Welcome to the Fantasy Maverick podcast. And today we are going to talk about the optimal position allocation for your fantasy draft this season. How many of each type of player do you need to target and get in order to build the strongest team possible coming out of the draft? Here we go.
Listen up. It's time for the Fantasy Maverick podcast, starring the guy who's going to help you win that fantasy championship, Jimmy Maverick.
Hello there, friends, and welcome to the Fantasy Maverick podcast. This is Jimmy Maverick coming at you from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I know last week I talked about, hey, you know what? I'm going to do a show on ranking the wide receiver twos and the running back twos for fantasy football purposes this season. But you know what? We got something big happening in the NFL this next week, and it's called the NFL Draft. And I really need to wait to see what happens with those players, to see where those running backs and wide receiver rookies go, because I'm sure they are going to be a factor in the RB2 and the wide receiver 2 conversation. So we're going to wait. We're going to do those after everything is settled and we know where all these players are going. So in the meantime, I thought it would be a great idea to talk about what is the optimal allocation of player types that you should be targeting in your draft. Okay, how many of each type of player do you need to draft for your fantasy league? And my general rule in regard to this is that how easy is it to get an alternative off the waiver wire if I need it, okay? The easier it is, the less of that player I need to have on my fantasy team. So we're going to go through that. And now we're going to assume we're going to talk about a standard fantasy lineup. And that would be, you all know this, single quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex position, and a kicker, a defense, and 6 bench slots. Okay, it's a total of 15 spots. That is your standard fantasy league. Most leagues run with that sort of roster. And obviously, if you're in a league that has a larger bench or whatever, you're probably going to want to modify this a little bit. But for the most of us, that is the league we're going to be in. That is the draft we're going to have. Those are the positions we're going to have to fill. So when I look at this, again, it is how easy is it to get an alternative? And the easier it is, the less you need of that player. So let's start off with the easiest players. We'll move up from there. So the easiest player that you can get in fantasy football is a kicker. And because of that, you do not need more than one kicker. I am always shocked and appalled every time when I'm looking through my opponent's rosters and I see somebody holding a second kicker in their bench. I am just shocked. On any given week, you're going to have anywhere from 15 to 20 kickers on the waiver wire to choose from. And so if your kicker stinks, if your kicker is shanking a lot of punts, it's not hard at all to get yourself an alternative. If it's the bye week, it's not hard at all to get yourself the alternative. And in fact, what I like to do is I like to wait for the bye weeks, because a lot of times people will drop their starting kicker and pick up a guy for the bye week, and I'll just pick up the guy on bye and then utilize that person. I've been able to get some elite kickers that way, especially the ones that have buys early in the season. So it's just something to keep in mind. But you don't need more than one, and it should be your last pick in the draft. When you look at the range of players and who you need to focus on at which points in the draft, when you get to those final 5 picks, it's mostly garbage picks, man. You are dart throwing. When you look at what wide receivers or running backs are available in the 14th or 15th round, they're just terrible, right? Don't spend an earlier pick on a kicker because you don't need to. You don't want to spend like an 8th or a 9th or a 10th round pick on that position. Just wait till the very end. Take it with your last pick. I guarantee you, there will still be great options available. You'll get yourself a fine kicker. My overall goal is I want one that plays on a good offense in a dome. That's my criteria for a kicker. If I can find that, great. If I can't find that, I look for the best one that plays outdoors. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with that. Now, the next least important position is the defense. And really, again, it's one of those situations where on any given week, on the waiver wire, there will be anywhere from 15 to 20 defenses available for you to pick. And so you're going to have great matchup opportunities. And really, I tend to just stream the defense position personally. What I do is when I'm in my draft, the defenses I like to look at are the ones that have who's got a great early season schedule, like the first 2, 3, 4 games. Who's a team that I could start for those weeks and know that they're in really good position. So like last year, man, looking at New England's schedule, it was like a total cakewalk. Buffalo had a total cakewalk schedule. Those are like the 2 defenses that I wanted more than any. And of course, both of those defenses did fantastic. The other reason why you don't need to go early on a defense or get a second one is there is so much volatility in that position, and you never know who the best defenses are going to be in advance. Now, last year for the draft, here were the top 5 defenses. Okay, are you ready? These are the top 5 defenses that were selected in fantasy football. The Bears were first, then the Jags, then the Rams, then the Vikings, and 5th were the Chargers. All right? It's a pretty bad list. That's pretty terrible. Who ended up as the top defenses in the league last season? Well, it was the Pats, obviously, the Steelers, the Niners, the Ravens, and then the Rams. So the Rams were the only top 5 pick that ended up in the top 5 for fantasy football. So don't spend an early pick on a defense. Again, your final 2 picks, one should be a defense, one should be a kicker. The order you want to take it in is entirely up to you. But that's the best way to do this. And just laugh at those people that are spending those 8th round, 9th round picks on that position because they are wasting their picks. You need to conserve those middle round picks for wide receivers and running backs and maybe a tight end if you go that late on a tight end. So again, those are the most obvious, right? Everybody knows that it's easy to get a kicker, it's easy to get a defense. But the next position might be a little bit controversial because, again, you only need one. You only need to draft one, a quarterback for your fantasy team, just one. And when it comes to me for strategy, if it's a 12-team or larger, I like to be the last person to select a quarterback. So if we look at this year, who are the quarterbacks that are in the 10, 11, 12, 13 position right now? Well, it's some pretty good options, man. You got Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Matthew Stafford. You want to go high upside, Daniel Jones. I mean, these guys are all going to be super easy to get. You'll be able to get them in like the 9th or 10th round. Let everyone else take the quarterback first and then grab one of those guys. And then that's all you need. One of the things about quarterbacks is it's an extremely deep position. There's always going to be good options available on the waiver wire, and there's always going to be emerging quarterbacks that are going to be fantasy startable assets during the season. Like last year, you had Tannehill, you had Fitzpatrick. Who was another one that was really good? Winston. Yeah, Jameis Winston. All these guys, virtually undrafted, sitting on the waiver wire, and they were all amazing for your fantasy team. Tannehill didn't even come on till week 9, but for the second half of the season, man, if you had him, you did great. He was a great option. And that's how you got to treat quarterbacks. If I'm going to take Matthew Stafford, which is a little bit of a risky pick, he was injured last year, missed the second half of the season, but he's always been a great fantasy asset. He throws for a ton of yards. Detroit's always playing from behind. They got some great receivers, including Kenny Golladay, who's one of my favorite wide receiver ones this year. So why not? I mean, don't spend an early pick on a quarterback. The only time I do is if I'm in a small league. If you're in a 10-team or smaller league, I do like to go with the positional dominant strategy where I go early on an elite quarterback and elite wide receiver to have a positional advantage over my opponents in a league that's usually much deeper, just because of the nature that it's only a 10-team league. But that's it, man. Just take one quarterback and you are good to go. You will always be able to find a decent alternative on the waiver wire during the course of the season. Don't worry about it. So let's move on. Now, the next one is going to also be a little bit controversial because of the issues plaguing this position. And it's the tight end, man. And again, with the tight end, you only need one. There is, and the reason for this is because there is no strategic advantage to taking a second tight end. That second tight end that you're going to roster on your bench is not going to be any better than any of those tight ends that are sitting on the waiver wire. We're talking most of the TE2s are 50 catch guys for maybe 700 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's where most of the tight ends live. They live in that realm where they're not worth that much. And so because of that, you don't need to spend a draft pick on a second tight end. Just take your one, and if something happens to him, which you probably will because it's the position, just go onto the waiver wire and find a second one. Find yourself another guy while he's injured. And that's all you need to do, man. And you will be fine. The other issue in regards to taking a second tight end is you don't want to be tempted to start 2 tight ends in your fantasy team. I got to tell you, that's a guaranteed loser proposition. And even if you are the kind of person who's like, I'm going to take 2 elite tight ends to hold on my roster, I'm going to put one on my flex. Well, if you take an elite tight end, a second elite tight end, you basically lock down your flex position, and you're not going to be able to utilize it properly with your running backs and your wide receivers, which are much deeper positions and easier to find flex plays. So again, there's just a number of reasons not to take a second tight end. The only time I ever take a second tight end is if there is more than one flex position. That is the only time I would do it. But for right now, with most leagues, you only have one flex slot. Save that flex slot for your running backs and your wide receivers. They will be much more valuable for you in that position. All right, so we've already got most of the positions done, right? There's only 2 left. So how many do you need of the rest of those guys? And let's talk about wide receivers next, because wide receivers, again, is a deeper position than running back. And it's easy to find guys emerging on the waiver wire. I mean, you think about Terry McLaurin last year, man. I mean, he just came right out of the gate and started scoring touchdowns and having great weeks on Washington right from the start. Nobody drafted him, and you just pick him up, and there were other rookies that emerged last year that were great. There were a couple of, bounce back players who did very well. I'm not going to say it's easy to get yourself a replacement wide receiver off the waiver wire, but it's easier, right? It's easier than running backs. There's more options available. So how many wide receivers do you need to take? Well, it's a simple calculation, and this would be for all setups. You add up the number of wide receiver slots, you add in the number of flex slots, and then you add 1 to the position. So in this sort of a league setup, you want 4 wide receivers. All right, that's all you need. And what I like to do, grab an elite one, maybe grab 2 in the middle rounds, and take a chance on some guy late. Take a chance on like Mecole Hardman or one of the rookies that are coming in. There's going to be lots of great options for wide receivers this year, and it's a passing league. And so there's lots of great options for that, but that's all you need. You need 4. Wide receivers are more durable than running backs. They tend to have lower rates of injury. Of course, this means that don't draft an injury-prone wide receiver like a Will Fuller or something like that, unless you can get him as your 4th if he's available late. He's one of those players that I'm kind of interested in just because it's a contract year, and I think he's got some huge upside if he can stay on the field. But that's the big if, right? So if I can get him as my 4th, I'd take him. But right now I'm seeing him, he's like in the 80s right now and moving up. And that's just way too early for someone like Will Fuller. But the position overall is much more durable than the other positions, than running backs. So again, in this particular case, you need 4. So here we are. We got 1 position left. We got the running backs that are left. We've only rostered 8 players so far. And so we still have, in this kind of league, there's 15 draft slots. So that means you need 7 running backs. All the rest need to be running backs. And again, it's kind of a conundrum because the running backs are the most important position in fantasy football, but it is amongst the least valuable positions in regular football. So there's not a lot of options. There's a lot of timeshares. There's a lot of, there's a lot of injury risk, man. But by far, running backs are the most prone to injury just because of their style of play. I would argue even more so than tight ends. It's just tight ends are having a couple of bad years right now. But, again, running backs, 7. And I go early and heavy to get myself as many elite options as possible. I've been looking at the early rosters, and typically in the past, I spend my second round pick on a wide receiver. Well, guess what? This year, you don't need to. You can get yourself a wide receiver 1 in the 3rd round, as late as pick 30. So if you're picking early, right, if you're in the first 6 picks, man, go running back, then get your elite wide receiver, and then, go back with another running back in the 4th. And depending on who's available in the 5th, I might even take another running back in the 5th before going and getting maybe a tight end or another wide receiver in the 6th round. I mean, that's how important it is. I like to, and then when you get to the end of the draft, those final 5 picks, which are just total dart throws, I'm targeting running backs that have that are playing behind injury-prone or older running backs that are maybe not going to be as effective this year. Some guys that I initially like a whole lot right now. Gus Edwards is a great option, playing behind Mark Ingram, who's 31 this year. That's one of the guys I like to target late. I've also been looking at Chase Edmonds, who backs up Kenyon Drake. Again, Kenyon's never really been a workhorse back, so I'm thinking there's going to be an opportunity there. Those are the kind of guys you look for late. But if you get yourself 4 elite running backs in the beginning of the draft, it's going to set you up so much better. And it's almost like the same calculation as we have for running backs. How many elite wide receivers do you want? How many elite running backs do you want? Well, elite running backs, I want however many running back slots I have, plus the flex, plus 1, I want 4 elites. So that means in the top 60, maybe the top 72, I'm going to take 4 running backs just to load up my roster. And I tell you, man, you feel so much more comfortable when you are sitting there and you've got, let's say you've got Alvin Kamara, Leonard Fournette, and Chris Carson as your, top 3 running backs, which you can get, and later on, maybe go for a Ronald Jones. I really like Ronald Jones this year. I think he's due for a breakout. I think the whole offense is going to be great. There's also like James White. I mean, just because Brady isn't on the Patriots anymore doesn't mean they're not going to be utilizing the pass catching running back. Okay. White has a clear role in that offense and he's going to utilize it. So anyway, that's where I'm at. So that's what you need to do. So let's recap, man. 1 kicker, 1 defense, 1 tight end, 1 quarterback, 4 wide receivers, and 7 running backs. That's what you need to do this year in your draft. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope this is helpful to you. A lot of the mock draft boards are open, and so try it out. Try out this strategy and roster this kind of team. And when you're done at the end, you can look and see what other, what kickers, what quarterbacks, what tight ends, and what defenses are still on the board at the end of your draft. They usually let you look at what's still available on the draft board, and you'll see that these positions are very deep, and there's still a lot of really good players that are available that you can pick up if you need them. But go with what you got, and just have confidence that this is going to be the right allocation for you for the upcoming fantasy season. So thank you very much for watching. We'll have another show next week. Not sure what I'm going to be talking about at that show yet, but then the draft happens and we will be talking all about that. So it's going to be good. And thank you very much for watching today. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe. Of course, leave a comment. I know some of you maybe have noticed that I'm looking a little different today. Yeah. This is what happens when you're locked in the house for 4 weeks and you're like, I need to make a change. And so, shaved off the mustache, shaved off the little soul patch there, and just going for the Patrick Mahomes look, I guess, right? I mean, we're basically identical twins. We're both equally good looking. So there you go, man. So that's it. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next week. Have yourself a great time, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy.